everybody, I'm Sasha White.
And I'm M.K. Fain, and this is Identity Crisis.
So today we want to talk about an email that we received from a viewer. And this email was asking us to basically talk about how to talk about these issues with people in your life. Mostly she wanted to focus on talking to progressives and liberals, not so much conservatives, which is somewhat of a different bag. So we've talked a lot on here about having these conversations, but today we kind of wanted to do a little something different, a bit experimental. We want to try modeling a conversation between a GC woman and someone who's sort of a Stepford liberal. That was MK's phrase that I'm going to borrow. Someone who's sort of going along with what they're supposed to think.
So today we wanted to show you two different ways that these conversations can go. The first is this hamster wheel of defensiveness where you're stuck always responding to the latest accusation from someone. And the second way is a skill that we think you can use to get a little bit more control in these conversations and hopefully actually stand a better chance of changing the person's mind. So I'm going to play the role of the trans activist, someone who maybe isn't that educated on the issue, but is just going along, like Sasha said, with what I'm supposed to think. And Sasha, do you want to take the role of the gender critical woman?
Yeah, we're going to give it a try. Let's see how I do. So people know, we didn't plan out a script for this. This is just off the cuff. So this is sort of what might happen organically.
So I think that normally these conversations come up around some sort of specific event that has happened in the country or maybe locally or something that you're seeing on the news that then people just bring up in casual conversation, and it can be hard to know, how do I respond in this moment? Do I just go along with it, or what can I say that's not going to be perceived as too extreme? So I'm going to try to frame it around some sort of a current event, and we can take it from there.
Perfect.
All right. You ready, Sasha?
I'm ready. And I'm thinking about if this were real, I would be a lot more nervous right now, thinking they're going to hate me and think I'm a bigot, but it's a little less scary in this situation.
It's just the whole world on YouTube.
Just millions of people, but no pressure.
Yeah. All of our millions of viewers.
Yes, because we have them.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Hey, Sasha, did you see that they're trying to ban trans women from women's sports in our state? Isn't that crazy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I saw stuff about that happening. I kind of see it differently though. Like, I think that there is a case to be made for, why we might consider some nuance here. I mean, yes, like I totally think that trans women deserve every sort of respect, but don't you think there's something like an advantage that males still have over females?
But I mean, they're not males, they've transitioned, they're women now, and especially they go through hormones and they're just trying to be who they really are and be their authentic selves. So why should a little girl who's trans have to play on a different team with boys? That's not fair. Wouldn't that put her at risk?
Well, yeah, I mean, I see your point. I think like everyone should be free to be themselves for sure. And the hormones, yeah, some people do use hormones to transition, and usually there are rules around that for sports teams, but even using hormones doesn't actually change your sex. So, it's not possible to change your sex. It's kind of like a common misconception that I've heard floating around right now, but I have looked into it quite a bit, and you actually can't change your sex. You can change those physical features and characteristics, and you can change your hormone levels, but I don't know if you know this, there's a lot more than just hormones that go into that sports advantage, because even if they do take hormones, they're still going to have stronger bones and bigger lungs and bigger organs. I mean, what do you think of like these track races where the trans girls just beat the girls every time? Have you seen that?
I don't think that's really happening. I mean, if they're better racers or competitors, then they should be able to compete fairly in the sport with other girls. Because, I mean, imagine being a trans girl and having to be on the boys' team. Wouldn't that just be so dangerous and invalidating? I mean, these kids are really at risk of all kinds of mental health problems and suicide if we don't let them be on the girls' teams. So I mean, who cares if you lose a race? That's not really the point. I mean, the point is to learn how to be a good sportsman, and isn't just being a good teammate, like helping your teammates along to like be safe and happy.
Well, it's funny because I don't actually disagree with like most of what you just said. I just see it in a whole different frame because, all that stuff is important. Like sportsmanship is arguably more important than winning or being a winner. But there is a reason that we have, female only sports. I mean, we kind of take it for granted. It's like the water that we swim in. But not so long ago, girls couldn't play sports at all. And then more recently, maybe they could play sports, but they had to like do it in a skirt. So we've been fighting, like feminists did have to fight for girls to even have these sports. I mean, that's why we have Title IX. It's pretty new. And, it's something a lot of us have benefited from. I know when I ran track in high school, it was like there's the boys and the girls team, and the times don't even measure up. So I think there's a real serious reason for having the sex segregation. It does get complicated if you've got a trans girl, but here's the thing: everyone has a right to have the opportunity to be on a team, but you don't really have the right to automatically be on the team. I mean, if I tried out for a team and I didn't meet their qualifications, I wouldn't be allowed on. They wouldn't really be, violating my right.
But that would be because you're just not a very good runner, not because of your gender identity. And if you discriminate against someone based on their gender identity, then that should be considered discrimination versus discriminating against someone because they're not fast. So if you tried out, I mean, and you're just not fast enough to make it, then, well, that sucks. Like that is the sportsmanship, that's the race. But if a trans girl tries out and she's fast enough to make it, but then is kept off because of her gender identity, isn't that sexism?
Well, I would say they're not kept off because of their gender identity. They're kept off because of their sex. It's not because they're trans, it's because they're male. So it's sort of misidentified as transphobia, but it's really just about someone being a male or someone being a female. So
Wait, but you're misgendering these people. You're saying that they're male when trans women are women. And that's actually really messed up what you're saying right now, because you're basically saying that trans women aren't women. Is that what you're saying? Because I think you really need to take a moment and like educate yourself and listen to what Black trans women and sex workers have said, because it sounds like you aren't really like listening to their experiences and what it's like to be a trans woman. I mean, it just I can't really believe that what you're saying right now. I thought you were progressive.
Well, actually, I am very progressive and I consider this to be one of the most important parts of my worldview. And when I say that a trans woman is not a woman, but is a male, that's not disparaging. And I think that's where a lot of this gets lost, because that's not bigoted. It's not in any way hateful. It's a statement of fact. And I actually don't think there's anything wrong with being a man or with being a male. So for me to say that a trans woman isn't a woman, it's because you have the category of males, and trans women are a subcategory of males. It's not disparaging. It's not an insult. There's really, for me, nothing in any way wrong with being a man who chooses to dress differently than most men and chooses to present in a more feminine manner. I'm actually completely in favor of that. Being a progressive, I support gender nonconformity.
But if they have a female gender identity, then they're not a man who's wearing a dress. I mean, that's really offensive to say. You're basically saying it's like a drag show when really this is who they are deep down, because they were assigned the wrong sex at birth and now they're trying to live their authentic life, and you're essentially saying that they're not who they say they are. And that actually is kind of hateful, isn't it? I mean, because all trans rights depend on the idea that trans women are women. So you're essentially saying that trans women shouldn't have rights, and that you think that they should be killed or something.
Well, I think it's pretty unfair to say that someone who has these questions and wants to talk about this would actually want anyone to be killed, because that's kind of.
But don't you know about the epidemic of violence against Black trans women? This is because of transphobia, because of people like J.K. Rowling, who say that trans women aren't women, and they blame trans women for violence against women. And It's
But
just
who's the
a
one
perpetuating myths.
who's the one assaulting the trans women? It's not feminists. Nobody ever read J.K. Rowling or Germaine Greer and then went out and attacked someone for not being masculine enough.
Who's
I think,
Jermaine Greer?
well, you're gonna not like her, honey. But so, I think that what we really need to do, my very strongly held belief, is that everyone should have their rights, their dignity conferred onto them, but we don't need to deny reality to do that. And everyone isn't always who they say they are. And trans people do have a sense where they want to present or live in the social role of the opposite sex. It doesn't mean they are the opposite sex. And there's this newish idea that treating them as if they were the opposite sex is synonymous to respecting them. I really push back against that because we can still respect someone and say, you're still male. That's okay. And it's not a bad thing. And it doesn't mean we don't like you or we hate you. It's just the way it is. And we have to figure out how to actually give them the appropriate rights within that. But hey, let's protect women. I mean, I thought you were progressive. I thought you were a feminist. Why are you blaming women like J.K. Rowling for violence against Black trans women, which is always done by men and is never influenced by feminists, as far as I know?
Well, do you know that? Can you send me a study that shows that it's always done by men? Because I
Absolutely.
have listened to Black trans women who have said that transphobia is really dangerous, and transphobia leads to these murders of these Black trans women. And I am progressive because I support gay rights and I support trans rights, and these things go hand in hand. And so you can't just say you're progressive while supporting one, but then not the other because you care more about sports than about human rights.
Well, there's a huge,
It kind of sounds like you're a turf.
you know what? Then I guess I am a turf because there's a huge demarcation between being gay and being trans. Being gay, you don't have to change anything about you. You don't have to get other people to say anything that isn't connected with founded in reality. It's just the truth of the authenticity of who you are inside. It's invisible, but it's real. It's a reality that can't be changed. And being trans is not something tangible. It's an experience for a person that can't be measured and it can't be proven. And
That actually sounds the same to me, though. So how do you prove what someone's sexual orientation is? If it's something that's internal, that is just what they feel, how is that any different from feeling what your gender identity is?
we can prove the proof of someone being gay is who they're aroused by. And that's just a material fact. I mean, they know. And the body doesn't lie. It's a quote from one of
But trans
the TV
people
shows.
know that they're trans, that they know that they're the gender that they say they are because their body has the feeling that it's wrong.
But it's actually a myth that you can be born into the wrong body. And no one is born into the wrong body. No one is born with the brain of the other sex. That's just anti-scientific. And when someone's gay, it's like the parts of your body that love don't like to lie. That's one of my favorite quotes from my favorite TV show, but The Americans. But that's just the truth of who they are. Being gay, being trans, okay, that's authentic to their experience. I can respect that and get behind that. But being the opposite sex isn't a reality of their experience. It's a fiction that we create. And sometimes I actually agree with going along with that fiction, like using preferred pronouns for people. I actually do that because it's a courtesy and I want to respect them and I don't want to insult them to their face or make them feel uncomfortable. But we do have to acknowledge that that is a fiction that we're playing into. Gay people never wanted anyone to say that they were something that they weren't. And bringing it back to the sports thing, girls have a right to be able to compete. And if there are males on their team, it destroys their chances of even getting to compete.
Good point.
Got you there. So I think it brought right to the point of the person saying you're a bigot, and that's where it would go, right? It wouldn't go much further.
Right. Like at this point, I think that the argument's actually stopping about like what the actual argument
Yeah.
is, and then it becomes about how hateful the person is.
Yeah. But that was very accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to do it with a straight face and also try to be genuine about the other side's arguments. And I, okay, I don't want to act like every person who takes the side in an argument is stupid or something. I think mostly they just really don't know that much about the issue for the most part.
Mhm.
But one thing I notice is how in these conversations, it's so easy for the trans activist side to just change the whole thing that you're talking about
Yeah.
so easily. And like then you're just kind of sent
Yeah.
off, like on this wild goose chase about a totally different topic because they just like derailed it. But I think you did a good job, especially towards the end, they're starting to bring it back to like, okay, but this is the point.
Yeah, you got me derailed though. You did. You successfully brought us in a whole. It's true because then you have what I noticed was like you had all these different. You were attacking me from all these different angles, or not me, but my position mostly. You did some ad hominems for the realism, touch of realism there, but you were mostly attacking all the points from so many like different angles. So then you're like trying to catch all these different balls, and that's quite hard.
And something I've noticed in these conversations is that, like you were saying a lot of stuff, and a lot of it was really valid. But then the only thing that I would reply to was the very last thing you said, just completely ignoring everything else. And I kind of wonder if when someone starts to do that, if maybe a way to help break that pattern is just to be super short and succinct. Hey, Sasha, did you see that they're trying to ban trans women from women's sports in our state? Isn't that awful?
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I saw that. Why do you think that's so awful?
Well, because they're saying that trans women can't compete in sports based on their gender identity. They're basically saying that trans women aren't women because otherwise they would have no problem with it, and they're discriminating against them because of their gender identity. It's really not fair.
So, but I mean, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, it wouldn't be right to be unfair to certain students, but I mean, why, I guess, what's wrong with just having girls only sports and maybe there could be a separate trans team or something? It seems like it's there for a reason. I mean, I guess what's wrong with that? I don't really understand.
Well, the trans girls are girls. So if they were on a girls only team, it would still be a girls only team. So
But how are they girls? Because I mean, yes, they're trans and I respect that identity, but they're what makes them on par with a girl? I mean, what makes them different from another boy?
because they transition and because they identify as a girl, because they know who they are, and now they're just trying to live their authentic selves, and they just deserve to be respected and validated in that. And it's really messed up to say that they're just like any other boy.
So is there a rule that they have to transition before they're on the team, the girls?
I think so. I mean, they're trans, so
I mean, but do you think
I
that all trans people should have to transition?
well, I guess not, because what if you're non-binary, or what if you don't have access to medical care? So no, I guess they don't have to transition to still be girls if they identify as girls.
So what defines a girl?
Well, if you identify as a girl.
But I mean, isn't that a bit of a circular definition? Because it's like I'm saying, like, well, what's a human? Someone who identifies as a human. Like it's kind of going around. Do you see how that's sort of circular?
Okay, so you're basically like a Nazi, and I thought that you were progressive, so we can't be friends anymore.
Fair enough. I'm a Jewish Nazi, so I guess
Busted.
you got me. My big secret.
I mean,
Uncut.
okay, a cut. I think you could probably tell how different that went for you.
That was totally
Like I was the one that was on the defensive the
right.
whole time.
And it was very good how you tried to argue until you couldn't, and then you called the person a Nazi. Like that was like, mwah.
Right. Exactly how it goes. But yeah, I think that was so different for you from how even I, like the whole time, the last time I felt like I was chasing you and I was getting you cornered. And this time I felt like oh shit, I brought this up to her, and like now she's asking me all these questions and I don't actually know that much about it. And like I kind of felt like the one who was getting cornered, and maybe in a truly equal conversation, like with a friend that you respect, no one should feel cornered. But it is nice to, you know, have the like upper footing and to force that person to think about it, because the last time I didn't really feel very forced to think about even what I was saying. I was just knee-jerk replying to the last sentence you had said. And this time I was like, oh shoot, like what do I know about this? And you know,
Yeah,
trying to imagine that I know nothing.
right, right. No, that was brilliant. I mean, I think God, what a difference that made. And it was so much less stressful for me because the first time my brain was like churning. I was like, what are all the strongest points I can make? Like, I have this, I have this, I have this. And to the point where I wasn't focused, I was in a really, where your brain is at that high pitched, chirpy level rather than like that calm voice. And then the second, and so it makes it so much harder to focus. Whereas the second one, right before, as you introduced it, I was like, okay, Sasha, remember, you're this one, you're supposed to be asking questions. So don't fall into that. And so I literally like took a deep breath, sat back a little bit to remind myself, like, back, like, don't, because usually I'm like in, like, ready to engage. So that was something that I noticed. And then it was so much easier for me to think calmly throughout the whole second one.
Nice. And you really came off as also more confident, which maybe seems like the opposite of what you would expect, because last time you were throwing facts at me, but this time you were like, you know, you just kind of, you seem more confident, and I felt like my footing felt weak. So I think that's kind of a nice trick to have there. If you're not ready to have the, you know, full on, like, let's throw our facts at each other argument, then, and also I think that most people, you know, I was the liberal who eventually came to be gender critical, still liberal, but now also gender critical. And that came through asking questions of myself. And so I think that we're much more likely to actually have an impact on changing someone's mind when they are forced to start answering their own questions.
That's a great point. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I now kind of want to go out and use that tactic next time. So it was so different. I've always tried to do the thing where let me get all my facts and my statistics ready. And, this brings us to a little bit of something else, but when I had my job in the publishing industry and I also had my personal Twitter about radical feminism and about gender ideology, critiquing gender ideology, I knew that there might come a day where I would have to defend my position. I turned out to be wrong because I never got the chance to defend my position. But I was all ready, like I had all these talking points ready. I had my arguments ready. I knew what I was going to say to try to prove that I'm not homophobic or anti-trans, but that I have these opinions on things and that it's a valid feminist viewpoint. But I think there's a lesson to be learned in that I never was given the opportunity to use any of them and that none of that mattered. I don't know what the lesson is, but I think there's a lesson there.
Yeah, I mean, I think this maybe goes a little bit back to what we talked about last week and what we wrote about in the column about how arguing with facts is not usually an effective way to actually change someone's mind. It can be a good way, you know, on social media when you have the most facts and the most sources, it's almost like a flex more than it is an actual like genuine attempt to connect with someone and influence their opinion. And so obviously we all should have facts. Like the facts should be informing your opinions. You should get the facts to make sure that your opinion is reflecting your values. But at the end of the day, I don't think that arguing with facts with someone is necessarily the best way. The best thing I think we can do is get someone to ask a question and then go try to find the facts for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they start to even ask it back, or maybe, you know, they might start to wonder, like, maybe, okay, for example, say I was less of this like combative Tiara, and say we were like, you know, friends who had a nice open relationship, like we've talked about on some other shows where we can have real, more genuine conversations. Maybe when you ask me, do they have to transition to play on the other team? You know, if I were less of a fighter in this moment and more of a friendly conversation, I might have said, Oh, I don't know. Do you know? I
Right.
think I do actually
Right.
know. Like, no, you don't.
Yeah. And then it
Right.
becomes a thing where we're actually looking for knowledge together. We're looking for answers together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this like joint venture that you're both like explorers on this path to finding an answer,
Yeah.
which is way less combative, and the other person's less likely to get defensive than when you're just bombarding them with facts.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's making me think of another conversation I once had with a friend who actually said, like, oh, did you hear about J.K. Rowling? She's going full turf or whatever. And then I said, I don't see it that way. And then she said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but her point, she was like, but you can change your sex. Because I said, well, you can't change your sex. She said, but yes, you can. And the conversation died. Like she changed the subject, right? That like we didn't get a chance to get into it. But I should have said right then, like, why do you think you can change your sex? What is that process? What does that mean? How does one change their
Right.
sex? So that would have been so good because she would have probably started talking about transition. And I doubt that I would have been able to change her mind. And it does take a certain level of science to understand, but not that much science to understand that you can't change your sex.
Yeah.
And Colin Wright has a really good analogy. I believe it was Colin Wright, and he said he thinks of it as like software versus hardware. Your sex is your hardware, it can't change, it's encoded in you. And the software is what you look like, your features, your characteristics, and you can change that. And you can look like the other sex. And that's called, in nature, that's called mimicry. But you can't become the other sex.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think that, yeah, if that person had been forced to start answering that question, and what you did in this mock argument with me was to point out the inconsistency then within the gender identity space, where it's like, well, okay, you just described to me how someone undergoes all these surgeries and stuff, but you don't have to do that to be trans, right? Because nowadays to say that you have to undergo transition to be transgender is actually transphobic. And so that once they start taking more and more of these positions, then it's easier to point out their own inconsistencies, and rather than arguing with maybe something that they haven't even thought about yet, because you're 5 steps ahead of them, you can meet them right where they are.
That is a great point. Like, try to get at those inconsistencies.
Yeah.
It might make them really defensive, but you know.
But depending on what your relationship is with this person, sometimes we do want to make people defensive, because if they're picking this fight with us and we're down for it, then it's okay to try to be like, no, like this is a thing that I'm not going to budge on. But if you have this sort of relationship with someone because you've cultivated a relationship of trust and openness and free thought and independence within your friendship or relationship or workplace, whatever it is, then hopefully pointing out an inconsistency maybe they'll get defensive at first, but then maybe they'll go home and think about it, in the shower or as they're falling asleep at night. And you don't have to get them to change their mind right then and there in that argument and say, yes, Sasha, you were right, I'm a turf now too. I honestly, if they just go home and think about it and have that little seed of doubt planted, then maybe the next thing that they see, maybe the next thing they see on the news about a male Olympian taking a spot on the women's Olympic track team, then they're like, oh, that reminds me of like what Sasha said, like, man, maybe that is kind of, maybe they're not exactly like women. Like maybe they do maintain some advantages. And, it's a slow process. In advertising, there's, who knows how true it is, but just the idea that someone has to hear something 3 times before they are sold.
And
so maybe it's like that.
It's also from Goebbels. It's like, there's this quote from Goebbels, like the propaganda minister for Hitler, that's like, you must repeat the propaganda enough times, like that the people, they think it's their own idea, basically. Anyway, it's basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? Like, I've talked a lot on this channel, I think, about how, I had this question in my head, but maybe actually that question was planted there through many other conversations that I don't even remember. And the more that we get the questions planted. I think that if you're gender critical, then we pretty much believe that when the questions are answered with the facts, the science, the logic, then you end up gender critical. So all we need to do is get people to ask questions. We don't need to convince them of facts.
So we hope you guys enjoyed those two little model conversations. It was fun for us to kind of role play that, you've seeing MK like you've never seen her before as a TRA. We have new episodes every Monday, so catch us here on this channel next Monday.
Be sure to like and subscribe for updates. You can also get this wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to check out our weekly column on 4W that goes side by side with these episodes to provide a little bit more in-depth content.